And we're live. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Solvable Mysteries podcast. I'm joined by Glenn Highcove. How are you feeling, man?
I'm doing okay. I'm just settling into the fall right now. It's getting colder over here finally, and we're doing a lot of things in the show lately, and we're doing some topics that I think are different. The one tonight, I mean, I'm kind of both fascinated by it and horrified. Apparently, the topic is so horrifying that even like people that are like horror aficionados. Um, one of them was shown the footage of what we're going to talk about today, and he was like he couldn't even finish it. So I mean, maybe that's enough teasing, kind of here on the when we're recording on almost the eve of Halloween. Yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting to see how the audience reacts to it, and I think the challenge for me is both kind of distaste with some of the stuff we're going to talk about because it's just so over the top and it's fascinating and it's almost too much. Like you know what I mean? I think that's going to be my real challenge is managing how to talk about it in a way that doesn't underplay how horrifying it is, but also makes it like so our audience can listen to it.
Yeah, exactly. I know what you mean because this is a very horrifying topic this week. And it is funny how it kind of lined up to Halloween Eve. Because this definitely probably is, and I know I say this a lot, that, one case is like probably the craziest thing we've ever talked about, but to me, like, this really seems like this could definitely be the craziest case we have ever talked about. Definitely the most morbid one, and definitely probably the most crazy one from my neck of the woods, right? Because we're going to be talking about the Dnepropetrovsk Maniacs. Now, this is a lot of you guys can probably tell that this is a foreign case. This is not a US based case. This is a case from Ukraine. And this case essentially happened in one of the biggest cities in Ukraine called Dnipro. Now, I'm not really sure if a lot of people are aware of Dnipro as a city. We can see it on the map here for everyone who's watching this on the YouTube channel, because everyone can always tune in to check it out. It's not Kiev, and because Kiev is probably the city that everyone has heard in respect to Ukraine. But Dnipro is also a pretty big city. It's an industrial city in the more eastern part of Ukraine. And essentially, the Dnepropetrovsk's maniacs were a pack of Ukrainian serial spree killers, thrill killers, robbers, one time cop killers who brutally killed nearly 2 dozen people during a murder spree that lasted nearly 4 weeks. Um, so the people involved, and I want to go through the people who are involved in this case. So we have Viktor Sayenko, we have Igor Spruinyuk. I still don't know how to pronounce that guy's last name. And we have Alexander Hanza. So on this image right now that everyone can see, because we're showing the picture of the three individuals, the first person to the most left is Alexander Hanza. He was 19 years of age at the time of the killing spree. Now, all of these men were 19, by the way. They were all classmates in high school. Now, Alexander Hansa, he was the only individual who did not receive a life sentence in this case because apparently he never actively participated in any of the murders. Now, in the middle, we have Igor Supruinyuk. I'm just gonna refer to his last name like that. All right. So I think from what I've gathered, he was the mastermind. And on the most right, we have Viktor Sayenko, who is seen in most of the pictures in most of the videos, but from what I've gathered, Igor Spruinyuk was apparently the person who may have, to some extent, bullied Viktor Sayenko into committing these crimes. Well, at least that's what Viktor Sayenko's, I believe, father, who was a lawyer, claimed in the defense of his son. Now, both of the men that committed the murders, which would be, the man in the middle and the man on the most right, Igor and Victor, they got life sentences. Now, Alexander Hanza, he only got 15 years, but I think in 2019 he has been released, and he is now married and has two children apparently. So I'm not really sure if that's, I don't know. That seems like it could be a weird little situation right there. Maybe he turned the corner, but I mean, we can definitely get into it. So, dude, your initial take before we jump into the evidence, into the story, into the timeline, your thoughts about the whole case. Did you find it especially grim and morbid? Because I definitely did.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. I think once we get kind of through the basic facts of the case, and actually some of my questions are specifically to you. So I think this is maybe an opportunity to give some insights about anything you think that's maybe unique about, let's say, Central or Eastern Europe in terms of like the period, or maybe what they would have experienced growing up. Though I know they're older than you are. They sort of straddled the Cold War more, I guess, with their childhood. So I think that's interesting in terms of your opinions about how that may or may not have impacted why they did the horrible things they did, according to Ukrainian authorities. Um, I guess I was struck that I I'd gotten some whiff of this. I want to say, at least during the era of content like this coming out of. Um, I think I thought it was Russia at the time, and maybe it was, but maybe it was one of the videos from this case today. But when I was really surprised when I read it, because I don't know that other people here in the U.S. really have this case in their radar. And I was thinking, well, I mean, I almost think that if it had happened here, or when things like this do happen, even on like a smaller scale, um, it's almost too terrible for them for news to cover. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where it's too over the top. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Yeah, nah, I totally agree, man. And I feel like, the events that we will describe now, I don't recall anything like this happening in the US, or at least hearing about stories from the States, because this seems like, Ukraine, mid 2000s Ukraine seemed like a perfect place for something like this to happen, because some of the Ukrainian towns, it's like a harsh life. Ukraine is a cool country, but at the same time, life there isn't easy for various reasons, like a bunch of conflicts, a bunch of instability happening in the country, and I think these things are naturally gonna just come up in that environment, right? So jumping to the story, I have a bunch of points of interest that I have noted down during my research. One of the interesting points that I want to mention, that all of these three men were actually, I'm not sure if they were classmates, but they were attending the same school. So, from what I've reckoned, they were all school friends. And an interesting point that I've read about these individuals was that they all had several phobias. And they actually dealt with the phobias in very strange ways. So, I believe Igor and Victor, like the murderers in this case, they were afraid of heights. So what they did, they apparently went to one of their apartment's balconies, and they would hang off the railings for minutes, or many, or hours on end, with doing different stunts like that. So, and they're doing this as in high school. So this is a crazy activity, in my opinion. This kind of already indicates that these individuals were like, I don't know, seems like um I don't know what to even make of it, dude. Like, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so that's the other kind of extreme content that I was much more familiar with, and is probably a lot more work safe. Um, like the stunt videos and like
Yeah.
the daredevil videos is almost like what I want to call it. Not, and when I mean like the traditional definition of that, I mean, I feel like that part of the world is infamous for these videos of people doing just incredibly dangerous things, like jumping across girders on like skyscrapers, or really high buildings, climbing really high buildings, and jumping, across ledges, and hanging by their arms,
Yeah.
from like 1,000 feet up from like a radio tower or something. I mean, just crazy stuff. So I mean, is that something that is also common in Lithuania where you live?
Not necessarily. I think I know what you are talking about. You're talking about like all of those videos about like people climbing like towers and like without any like safety harnesses and
Yeah.
filming themselves. Yeah, we have a few guys like that. Actually, one of the YouTubers whose name is like Shay or something like that. He's actually from Lithuania. I think he's like one of the most popular people in that niche, you know what I mean? So I think it's a Eastern European thing, perhaps.
I mean, without, I guess, getting too derailed on the topic, I feel like it does impact it though, because it's one of the things we know about the suspects in this case. Um,
Of course.
where does that come from? I mean, what is it? Why don't we see that in like France or the U.S. or the U.K. or China or South Korea? I mean, I've seen something similar to it in India, maybe, or Pakistan, where they do that kind of like weird train dodging. You've seen like the train version of that, where
Yes.
people hang off the side of it and they kind of dodge things at the last second,
Yes.
and dodge tunnels and stuff. So that, I don't know what's in what's the common thread, do you think, between like people in Ukraine? Is it like poverty?
I,
Is it like not having a good future ahead of you necessarily, or not feeling secure about that future?
I think it's a combination of things. I think it's like lower living standards mixed with maybe really sleazy parenting mixed with growing up in an environment that doesn't provide you with much opportunities. Well, every environment kind of provides you with opportunities, of course, if you just look for them, but maybe they're not as open, like they're not as visible as they are in other countries, you know what I mean? So I think it's like a mixture of like poverty, of like bad parenting, and not thinking that you have anything to lose, not thinking that you have anything to live for, so you just end up doing crazy stunts, you know?
Okay, yeah, makes sense. All right, yeah, maybe that's how it's like a lot of other daredevil behavior. Maybe it's just we don't hear about it as much, or the daredevil behavior has shifted in terms of how it manifests. But yeah, it's definitely interesting to hear. I think that's the part about this case that was the most interesting to me, was understanding kind of what the like like they actually had documented stuff of how these guys kind of grew up, and how they sort of how their behavior formed over time. Like, I guess that's the
Yeah.
advantage of criminals having enough rope to hang themselves with when they have digital devices like this, and they start recording stuff for their own,
Hmm.
entertainment.
Exactly. Now, remember Alexander Hansa, the man who is now roaming free, who was just an accomplice, meaning that he was aware of the murder spree, but he wasn't part of the murder spree. Now, Alexander Hansa was also a friend of theirs when they were young, and Alexander Hansa apparently was the most squeamish out of the bunch, and he had something called hemophobia, right? So I want to jump to Alexander Hansa's picture if I have one. I'm not really sure if I see one, well, let's just jump to this picture, right? So Alexander Hanza is the man in the middle, and he had something called hemophobia, which is apparently a fear of blood of sorts, right? So now Igor Spruinyuk, the man on the leftmost corner, he suggested to combat Hansa's fear of homophobia by capturing dogs in the nearby forest and torturing them and killing them. And actually, if you're gonna Google this case, right, if you're gonna Google the Dnepropetrovsk Dnepropetrovsk Maniacs, right, and you're gonna go to the Google images, you're gonna see a bunch of pictures of these guys where they're taking pictures next to dogs hanged from like tree branches somewhere in the forest, and some of those are very sad and very graphic. One of the pictures really made me sick because there's a lot of like sad emotions in the dog's face, and the dog is, dead. And one of the boys, I'm not really sure which one, I think it may have been Victor, he's posing next to the dog with his tongue out, kind of mocking the dog because the dog's tongue was also out because, essentially it's dead by then. So that was one of the ways they were combating um, their fears, right? And as I was going through the pictures, and they're online, like you can find them on Google search, but I didn't want to include them in our YouTube visual portion of this podcast because they're really gruesome, and I just don't necessarily want to show that. Like I'm okay with showing like gruesome stuff, but like just something about like dead dogs, it's like too much for me. I really don't like seeing that, you know what I mean? And from what I'm trying to say here is that there are so many pictures of them posing with dead dogs, like maybe 5 or 6 that you could like easily find with one Google search. It seems like killing humans was almost like a natural progression, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean that's probably the perfect way to put it, because when they look at the habits of serial killers, um, it's really common for them to use animals in the way that these guys did. It's almost like the animals become a way to train oneself. I mean, for some of the serial killers, it's interesting because they use the animals to satisfy their curiosity about um, anatomy, right? So some of them either out of part of their psychopathy or just genuine, kind of like childlike interest in like physiology, like we all kind of probably do as kids before you really know. That's one way to satisfy it, but obviously it's like a really low empathy or no empathy way to do it, right? Because you're inflicting damage and death on somebody. But in their case, if that was at all the motivation, it was like a secondary or tertiary objective. It really seems like they were trying to. I mean, I read it as them trying to challenge themselves in like a sick way, like they're trying to toughen themselves up, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
I'll also say I've seen similar. This is kind of weird, but I've seen similar levels of, I guess, cruelty to animals and sort of barbarism with animals in around the world. Some groups of special forces. So some countries, I'm not going to like stigmatize any particular country, but it's the same kind of thing where it's like to push yourself as one of these elite special forces who are supposed to do anything and kill anybody, etc., to push yourself into showing your peers that you can like push through your own disgust and inhibitions and even humanity to not do certain cruel things. I've seen like what you talk about happening to, and what we know from you and I doing research on this, what we know happened to the victims, both human and animal, of them. It's really similar in a way. So it's almost, I have to wonder at this point in the story if there's similar motivations about, at least with each other, trying to like as it's described, they're toughening themselves up So it's like, well, I like animals. Well, because one of them did actually. One of them would not even bathe his kitten because he was so worried about scalding it. And then by the end of this whole thing, they're like killing kittens. They're killing dogs. They're killing, eventually people.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Some of their earlier pictures before the killing spree took place, because they were taking pictures and documenting their activities way before the killing spree even began, shows them drawing swastikas and other symbols with animal blood, as well as giving the Nazi salute. So we have some of the pictures here. I think this one is a picture of, and we can see like a dog's face on the right side of this picture. I think that's a dead dog by now. And you can see there's a swastika drawn with that dog's blood. So this is a very morbid case for sure. They were also giving out Nazi salutes, and there was something with like them really liking Nazis. You know what I mean? Like they were doing essentially like the salute, like swastikas appeared in their pictures, as well as um we can see Victor, or this is Igor, I'm sorry, this is Igor, right? We can see Igor in this particular picture with like a drawn Hitler mustache. So did you find? Do you have any thoughts about their apparent Nazi Germany fascination? And this is like a definitely a radical. These suspects were definitely like also radical in a sense. Like it almost like I just want to finish this point. It almost kind of represents like a certain rebellion against the system in a way. You know?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm gonna go off one of my Glenn theories. It's almost like this part of the world, in some ways, is mirroring some stuff we saw. I mean, gosh, around the time I was born, even earlier. Um, and maybe this is because, and this is specifically in the U.S. and like the UK, and I guess also Western Germany. Um, in that era, you saw like the punks, yeah, punk rock music, and punks also used to do a lot of Nazi stuff.
Mm.
And it's interesting because it's not really like them and fascists don't mix, right? Like if they had been around during, in the Nazi era, they would have actually been like persecuted, punk rockers, just like how people who like swing music and things like that, anything that wasn't seen as sort of wholesome was persecuted. So the reason why they're doing it is because in the 70s, if you're a teenager, um, your parents probably fought in the war or had relatives who fought, etc. Right? Like they lived through the war,
Hmm.
and I think it was to be provocative and insulting and obnoxious like teenagers are. So I feel like what my point I'm getting to is, I think that anybody that does kind of the Nazi and fascist stuff in Eastern Europe now, I mean, the great irony is, of course, that's who was like slaughtering their parents or their grandparents, right, or their great grandparents back during World War II. So it's not really that you support them, even though you may. I'm sure there are people that do think that they support the ideas um, that are represented by that. But I really think it's like a form of rebellion. Now, for these two guys, I'm going to make a case that this is evidence of them not being mentally ill. So even though somebody might at this point look at these two guys and look at all these swastikas and the behavior we've already talked about and say, "Oh my gosh, this is a sign of mental illness," they're like externalizing, they're destroying their environment. Well, yeah, like I would say those things are evidence of some kind of mental imbalance or sickness. But the Nazi thing, I think, is like sort of that them being obnoxious and them finding something really awful to be provocative. Now, compare that. Here's the thing later on, the issue of their mental fitness, at least if one of the suspects, will come into question. Oh, like and at least here in the States, I don't know what I didn't get a chance to find out what it is in Ukraine, but in the States, the often the standard for insanity defense is whether you knew something was wrong when you did it, whether you were
Yeah.
capable of knowing. So just think about this. So far, doesn't it kind of look like they know they're doing things that are wrong? Because you know what I mean? Why pick the Nazis otherwise? Why not pick, you know, like 18th century, Victorian dress, or like, you know what I mean? They're picking something that's distinctively the worst of the worst in terms of the cultural symbols and the society they live in and the societies adjacent to them.
Exactly, and I think that's a really good point. And besides, if you think about like the historical aspect, Ukraine was on the other side, not on the side of the Nazi Germany. They were part of the Soviet Union, so it's maybe also like a little bit of a rebellion to the local culture. But also, I do agree that I think they were just like maniacs, but they were aware of what they're doing, so they shouldn't be deemed as unfit, to like be trialed or something like that. Because I think they're sane, they're just literally like evil, and they have no standards. Also, it seems like there were many occasions where it all could have been stopped, but it really makes me question where were the parents at that point.
I'll just to finish the point, let me make a
Of course.
comparison. Let's say against, you know, you could have maybe like a parent who kills their child or their children, like a suicidal parent, or like we've seen, or a family annihilator, and that person,
Yeah.
their reality may, I guess their sense of morality would make them do stuff that was offensive or awful or evil, but like in an irrational pattern. You know what I mean? Like strange ideas. Maybe like you see with schizophrenia, where people get obsessions with weird things that don't make sense. And so far, you're not. I mean, they're obsessed with horrible things. They're obsessed with things that seem purposefully, deliberately offensive.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, to me, they are tourists in the worst of the worst of, I guess, human behavior.
Exactly. No, that's a really well put, man. Now, jumping back a little bit to their, how everything kind of escalated to the murder spree. Now, essentially, they weren't murdering people, but after graduating high school, Sayenko and Alexander Hanza, the accomplice, the two men worked their own odd jobs apparently, while Igor, the man on the left in this particular picture, he was officially unemployed, but he became an unlicensed taxi driver because his parents, for one of his birthdays, I think maybe it was the latest birthday, gave him a vehicle which was a green Devo Lanos. It's a South Korean make. I think I've seen this car somewhere in my country as well. I don't think they make these anymore, of course, because this was an early 2000s build. And by the way, this is not the like exact car that they driven. This is just a stock image of that vehicle. It's a really small, tight hatchback vehicle that Igor used to, work as a taxi driver, but now eventually his endeavors turned devious because they all three of them began robbing Igor's passengers. And some of the people that they robbed actually later winded up as their victims. So, could you imagine that? You jump into some unlicensed, unofficial taxi because they're probably going to give you a cheaper discount, but you either end up getting completely robbed by these three little maniacs from Ukraine, or you're gonna get smashed in the head with a hammer, and there you're gonna get filmed, and your video is gonna be posted online. So it really makes you wonder, do you really want to save that one Ukrainian ruble?
Yeah, and plus it's a great um, cover for people that were doing the kind of things they were doing, or or other variations thereof. I mean, because you're getting someone to get into your taxi, or your car, I should say, your vehicle, and then once they're in there, they're kind of at your mercy, especially if you're able to drive really quickly someplace else. A lot of people are afraid to jump out of a moving car, or if you could lock them in, you know, if it's somebody weak, and that seems to be the pattern of who they victimize, they always victimize someone that was weaker than them or who they outnumbered. Um, they're not going to try to like assault the driver, right? They're not going to do what maybe like a much tougher opponent would do in that circumstance.
Exactly, exactly. Moving on to the story, right? So everything is happening in 2007, and on March 1st, Alexander Hansa, the accomplice, committed two armed robberies that he would end up being charged for. Now, I'm not really sure how that legal process went down, but the other two, the two that we can see in this picture right here, I think they're in Igor's vehicle here as well. Um, the two, Igor and Victor, they lost interest in robbing people and they decided to take it to the next level and they started murdering random people, apparently just for the thrill of it. That was their only reason for killing people. And their killing spree began on July 25th, 2007. And it all began with Yekaterina Ichenko and Roman Tatarevich. So the first victim of these two evil suspects, right? Yekaterina Ichenko, she was a 33-year-old woman who was walking home after having some tea at her friend's apartment. Now, according to Viktor Sayenko's confession, he and Igor Sprunyuk were, quote, out for a walk when also Sprunyuk, the man on the left hand side of this picture, had a hammer with him. Now they saw Ekaterina Ichenko walking past them. Now, as soon as Ekaterina walked past the two men, Igor spun around and hit her in the side of the head with a hammer. And, apparently an hour later, her body was found by her mother. There wasn't many details on that particular case. That's all I've managed to find. But the interesting fact was that within an hour of their first murder, both of them killed another victim, which was Roman Tatarevich. He was sleeping on a bench near the first murder scene, so maybe a homeless man. I didn't find more information on Roman Tatarevich, but Tatarevich's head was smashed with blunt objects numerous times, rendering him completely unrecognizable. So, it all started on because apparently, from what we know, they didn't really kill anyone else before July 25th, 2007. So, it's so sudden, and they killed two victims within the time frame of 1 hour. I mean, that's definitely drastic. At that particular point in time, do you think their mental state was such that they were gonna keep doing this until they get caught, or do you think it was a situation where they were like just trying it out once, thinking that let's just see how it feels? Like, what do you think their mental state was at that point in time?
I feel like at that point they were looking to like they were almost testing themselves, and maybe they were egging each other on to go to the next level. So yeah, I mean, because I think that even after all the dogs and all the other horrible stuff they did before that, probably it was a challenge for them. I don't mean that in a good way. I mean that in like saving their humanity way. If they listened to their inner conscience there, yeah, I think it was a challenge to see if they could do it. So it was like them getting blooded.
Exactly, exactly. Multiple bodies would be found during this 4 week long murder spree, and usually 2 bodies per day. Now, additionally, some victims weren't killed in the town of Dnepropetrovsk, which I think is just the town of Dnipro. And quickly jumping back to the map, right? If this is Dnipro, these are the local towns that they would commit their killing sprees as well. I think we have in the notes a few of those murders taking place, a few of those that we could like discuss more in detail, you know what I mean? So it wasn't happening in Dnipro. I think a big advantage for them was the fact that they did have a vehicle and they could transport themselves easier across town. Maybe the vehicle served as an additional boost to their confidence that they could get away with anything at that point. Now, jumping back to a little bit of the notes here, um, their killing spree came to public attention when there was a survivor. Now, the survivor was a 14-year-old boy from Fid Fidhordny, I think that's how we pronounce that name of that little town. It's just a little town up north from Dnipro. And the story there is that there were two 14-year-old boys who were fishing, I think in maybe a more wooded area, when Igor and Victor attacked them. Now, one of the boys died. We don't have any more details on how that happened, but one of them survived, who was a 14-year-old Vadim Liakov. And Vadim immediately ran to the police after his friend was murdered. And at that point, I'm not really sure how many bodies were already found, but at that point, I think everyone must have connected the dots. Now, one interesting thing about this case, right, and I really found it interesting, and maybe you have as well, man, is the fact that the police initially didn't report, to my understanding, these crimes to the public, and only later on they started talking to the local pawn shops, because that's how these two individuals were caught, is when they were trying to sell their victims mobile phones in one of the pawn shops, and the pawn shop was already informed about like a potential murderer trying to sell stuff to them. What do you think of the tactic of the Ukrainian police to potentially not disclose the killing spree? You know what I mean? I think it may be a good idea to tell the local population about what's happening.
It's weird, but I feel like that goes back to, it might be that the practice it has roots in Soviet practice. So even though obviously they're not part of the Soviet Union anymore, there's probably some good amount of the rules and the practices and maybe even the culture of policing and governing that comes from that. So the Soviet Union was notorious for covering up specifically serial killings, but a lot of different crimes during the era. There's a famous HBO movie back from when like HBO movies were like the earlier days of HBO, let's say, before all the famous series, called Citizen X, that I actually recommend. So Citizen X is about this guy who works in the Soviet Union in one of these like Soviet like towns or states or whatever you call them. And so like what happens is all of a sudden like young children are getting murdered, and the Soviet Union's response to this is like, well, we don't have this kind of degenerate stuff going on in the Soviet Union, and like the problem is like it's really going on, and to that effect, they did not tell anybody in the public, and the guy, they had like one investigator on it, and he really is challenged by like what's going on. He's like, geez, I can't really, I'm not equipped for this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly, that's a good point. Now, one of the victims, who was Natalia Mamrchuk, she was actually beaten to death in front of many witnesses. Natalia was a 45-year-old woman who was riding her scooter in the nearby village of Diovka. Now, that village of Diovka is just a little bit to the west from Dnipro. It's also a really small town. It's basically in the, you could pretty much say it's in almost like the district of Dnipro. It's right there. Now, she was passing through a wooded area when the two men approached her and knocked her down off her scooter. They then proceeded to bludgeon her to death with a hammer or pipe and drove off on her scooter. Now, local witnesses gave chase but lost sight of the attackers. So, it's a grim scene for sure. The investigation was kept secret at first, as I've mentioned earlier, but eventually sketches were distributed. And also, the victims' stolen possessions were listed to local pawn shops, so that you know how it all worked. There were a bunch of victims, and they all had stolen items, like items that the maniacs stole from the dead corpses. And now police knew of these items that were missing from the dead corpses, and so they went to the local pawn shops in Dnipro and they said, if anyone is trying to sell this particular phone, this particular bag, this particular case, whatever, right? Then call us because these items belong to the murder victims, right? Does that make any sense? Like, is that a good practice? I think that's a smart idea.
Yeah, that's pretty normal here, to the point that pawn shops often can get fined or even criminally prosecuted for not reporting stuff that the cops have that the police have flagged for them. Because yeah, it's like the number one thing people do with stolen goods is they try to fence them, and some kinds of things are pretty hard to sell to just like your next door neighbor, right? So you got to try the first place they try before they kind of learn better is the pawn shop. So this was probably some pretty decent policing.
Yeah, I do agree here. Now, the three individuals were all arrested 1 week after the murder spree ended, after Igor Sprunyuk tried selling a mobile phone which belonged to one of his victims. Now, the phone had to be turned on to ensure it worked, allowing law enforcement agents to find it and trace its location, leading to the arrests of Sayenko and Sprunyuk. Now, I don't really understand that, how they caught up to them. Like, does that make any sense to you? I just want to read this one more time, dude. Uh,
Yeah.
okay, so, because I didn't understand this part. The three were arrested a week after the spree ended when Igor Sprunyuk tried selling a mobile phone belonging to one of his victims. The mobile phone had to be turned on to ensure it worked, allowing law enforcement agents to find it and trace its location, leading to the arrests of Sayenko and Sprunyuk. I don't get that.
Yeah, so the deal was the phone when they stole it. Like we always talk about locating phones. Like the phones either have locating software or you can switch on a remote mode to send the phone's location. So that's why how I read it was the phone was off. So the pawn shop, like when these scumbags go sell the stolen property, the pawn shops will like turn it on because I don't even know that
If
this
it
phone
works.
works. Yeah, I'm not going to give you money until I see that the light turns on. So they turn it on, and right away the phone, like I don't know what specific kind of phone it was, etc. But I'm assuming almost everybody has some kind of anti-theft mechanism in it. So they turn it on, and as soon as the phone turns on, the phone's like, "Hey, I'm over here at this address," and they're like, "Aha!" So then that's perfect for them, right? Because as soon as they get a location, it's only a matter of time of going down the relatively short list of people that could have brought in that phone. And then, now they have a description and now they know kind of who to look for.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. So perhaps, oh, yeah, that makes actually perfect sense. Um, yeah, now that you explained. Now, authorities also at the same time invaded Alexander Hansa's the accomplice's home and also arrested him. But Alexander Hansa, just before he got arrested, he managed to erase the information on numerous stolen mobile phones, and he also attempted to flush them down the toilet. So what do you think? I was wondering, what do you think Alexander Hansa potentially erased from the mobile phones? Was that like more maybe gruesome, incriminating pictures or videos, right?
Yeah, I think anything that connected it to him. I mean, that was the one thing I had to kind of I was amazed by. Apparently, he was able to. The way I read it, maybe I didn't read it properly. As I understood it, he had flushed it down the. He flushed it to the phone and other stuff down the toilet successfully, and I guess I don't know if it actually ruined it to the point that it somehow erased the materials. Or the other thing I thought of was maybe the Ukrainian authorities were like, ugh, this thing's just been sitting in a septic tank for 24 hours. I don't know that I even want to like touch it to try to, you know what I mean? Like how do you even go about that? Because especially back then, water ruined everything. Like now you're seeing, I don't know, stuff catches a break sometimes, and the way memory is stored. I don't know enough about like phone storage or electronic device storage memory back then to be able to really know whether how reliable, you could recover stuff from water and or sewage damage, fecal damage. I mean, my God.
Yeah, that's definitely a difficult task right there, right? Now, all three, when they got arrested, right, essentially Sayenko, Sprunik, and Hansa were charged for numerous instances of premeditated murder, but not Hansa. Hansa wasn't charged for murder, but they all were charged for animal cruelty, robbery, and armed robbery. All three immediately made confessions, though Igor Sprunik would go to withdraw his eventually. All three men were found guilty of all of their respective charges. Sayenko and Sprunik were both sentenced to life imprisonment, while Alexander Hansa, the accomplice, was sentenced to 9 years in prison. Uh, the brief sentence being because Alexander Hansa never participated in the murders, however, he was aware of them. Sayenko and Sprunik's videos of their murders received a large amount of attention. One of the videos managed to find its way onto the internet almost a year, like definitely over a year after the murder spree ended, which was on December 4th, 2008. So that was like more than a year and a half, I think, after their murders. And it was the recording of the brutal murder of Sergei Yatsenko that became viral on the various shock sites registered in the United States. I have a question immediately. It got leaked in 2008. I wasn't really surfing the internet as much back then. Have you ran into this video or have heard of a video? Because it has a very morbid name. It was called Three Guys, One Hammer.
Oh no, I don't think I saw that video. I saw ones that were kind of similar to it, but no, I did not see that specific one. I don't think. Ugh, God, but
Yeah.
I do remember the internet. It was a little easier back then because there wasn't, I guess, as much censorship, and even like YouTube had different rules back then, like way different. Um, it was easier. There were a lot of sites that like had not been taken offline yet that still had web hosts, where you could get content like that. And there's stuff now, but it definitely made its way around.
Yeah. Now, in the video dubbed Three Guys, One Hammer, a 48-year-old man named Sergei Yadvenko, who was disabled because of a recent bout with cancer, and at the time of his murder, he was missing while he was riding his Dnepro motorcycle. Now, in the video, his, he was killed uh, by the two maniacs, right? His battered body was found 4 days later with signs of a savage attack visible even after 4 days in the summer heat. While the body was decomposing after 4 days of summer heat decomposition, it was still a gruesome scene, one way or another. I would say evidence of a savage attack were still left on his body, right? The leaked video showed the murder of this man. In the video, the man is seen lying on his back in a wooded area and is struck repeatedly in the face with a hammer held inside of a plastic bag. One attacker stabs Yatsenko in the eye and abdomen with a screwdriver. Yatsenko is then struck with a hammer to ensure he is dead. The attack lasts over 4 minutes, during which the victim lapses in and out of consciousness. One murderer is seen smiling towards the camera during the video. The murderers walk back to their car, showing that the crime took place close to a road and they had their car parked next to this road as well. They discuss the murder in the video calmly, expressing mild surprise that the victim was still breathing after a screwdriver was plunged into his exposed brain. The suspects then wash their hands and the hammer with a water bottle and begin to laugh. Only two suspects appear to be present in the video, with one always behind the camera. So, dude, your thoughts on
It's
that?
horrifying. It's amazing that they actually. Are you familiar with the movie Clockwork Orange?
Not really.
Okay, so it's a Stanley Kubrick movie. It's based on a novel, a famous novel that was about a dystopian future. And in this dystopian future, there's these gangs of teenage hooligans um, who do all kinds of like just antisocial behavior, assaults, rapes, all kinds of things. And what these guys did actually makes what happened in Clockwork Orange look tame, and that's amazing. I mean, given the standard that movie was so, what was depicted in that movie as far as teenage hooligan violence was so so violent and over the top that it was actually, the movie was banned in Britain for the longest time. It may still be. I'm not sure. I think they finally lifted it. It's interesting too because it shows that something like what we're talking about here, it both is and isn't unimaginable. Like someone imagined it, and it's something that seems to be the kind of barbarous behavior we'd see, but we don't see it that much. At least not in Europe. Now you do see, interestingly, some of this behavior in like war zones. So like in Africa, where there's been a lot of just even in past decades, there's been a lot of like revolutions and kind of insurgencies and things like that. You've seen like war crimes to this level with like kind of
Yeah.
maiming people and killing them in gruesome ways. And once again, it just seems to be a common theme. Like in that case, you are trying to terrorize a group of people, and you're almost trying to terrorize your own soldiers into being tougher, or like going beyond, right? You know what I mean? It's pushing beyond
Yeah.
a certain point. It's Yeah, the whole thing. I mean, when I was reading this thing, I was appalled because I think we haven't even. I think probably for out of the sensibilities for our audience, we haven't really even fully explained some of what happened in it, because I think some of it's too gruesome to even say for both our audience or for YouTube, the kind of things that were happening. But it was the kind of things where um, you even look like so. I mean, we're talking about maiming people while they're alive, poking things into like their eyes, gouging out eyes while they're still alive, for these victims. At some point,
Yeah.
once again, you have to ask, like, I'll find one thing that I did find interesting was, for the whole range of victims that they're accused of, doing this stuff to. Interestingly, you didn't really see any sexual assault, did you?
Yeah, that was the thing. This thing was, this particular detail was definitely missing from, their sprees.
It was almost like it was specifically or purposefully missing. So once again, there's a method to the madness, and that's my point. There is, you would think if it was just two people taking advantage of being able to inflict their will on other people, um, you would think, I mean, the women were part of it, both women and men and children. I mean, somewhere in there was someone that they would have potentially victimized that way if that was on the menu. But it really does seem like no, they were on this specific mission to um, victimize people in a specific way that was just extremely disgusting and gruesome. Like it really seemed like they like it was designed to be as almost repellent to them as it was to anybody else.
Exactly. Exactly. And I'm reading some of these victims. They seem like the vast majority were middle-aged people, but there were some young individuals as well. I'm reading that on some of the occasions the victims did survive, right? They didn't kill every single time. For example, on June 25th in Dnipro city, Viktor Pertsev, who was 58, apparently his face was smashed with a blunt object, but he did survive, right? On other occasions where the people didn't survive, we have a young man, Igor Nechvoloda. Yeah, Igor Nechvoloda. He was 21. He was bludgeoned with a hammer over 15 times. Now, his killers, the maniacs, wrote a swastika on his forehead. So, that's also a little bit of their, modus operandi. Constantly Nazi Germany symbolism was a part of their murder spree, right? We have, Sergei Yatsenko, who was probably, the man who's seen on that video that became viral. I think he's like maybe one of the more gruesomest murder victims in the whole of their killing spree. We have instances where a woman named Lydia Mikrenshishcheva, who was 70, she survived. That's all we know, that she was attacked and she survived. Yeah, I see that there's even 14-year-old kids. One of them survived. It seems like it was a complete set of random victims, like a complete set. They were going after anyone, you know.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I guess at this point, this thing went to trial, and it was interesting because I don't know, some of the defense by these guys was predictable. That they had a whole thing about like, well, one guy wanted to claim that he was insane. Other guys said that it was like try to put the blame on the other guys. But then it got to this other thing where they started trying to say it wasn't them, like the for all this video footage they had, not just of the actual murders. I mean, you couldn't be stupider than to record yourself committing murders, and whether they did that just for their own entertainment or whether they thought somehow that they were going to be able to sell that to maybe the black market, which is one of those kind of outstanding theories about whether there was another motive. I don't know that they would have even been smart enough to do that, but regardless, um, there started to be this whole other set of theories, like this conspiracy theory that the real murderers were these other people who were like well connected, and rich children of Ukraine of children of well connected and rich Ukrainians that were connected to sort of whoever the ruling cadre was at the time. Though I mean, interestingly, this is also at a point where the country's been through a couple different sets of like governments back and forth, right?
Yeah, exactly. That whole defense scheme that was apparently manned by, I think, Sayenko's father, who was a lawyer, was definitely wacky. I didn't get the bottom of it. My rough understanding of that defense logic was that apparently one of the suspect's father, who was a lawyer, claimed that other kids with the same exact names from wealthy families committed the crimes, but they're but since they had wealthy parents, they got off the hook, and some other kids, which were the people trialed in this case, who had apparently the same names, got trialed. And it's a big cover up by the Ukrainian government. And I don't know. Essentially, I read that there were like some support, not necessarily for this theory, but like just support from the local people, local populace, just because there was I'm sure there was a heavy anti-government corruption sentiment in Ukraine, which is probably still there. You know what I mean? Um, and yeah, it was like a crazy defense scheme, but I don't know. I've seen the videos, and I definitely think that it's like the same people. You know what I mean? It's like pretty obvious to me that the pictures and the people at trial are like the same people. And we could do a quick test, dude, actually, to see. We could like just compare really quickly. Okay, so this is one of the videos, right? This is definitely the culprits, whoever they are. And now we could look at them. Okay, so this is Igor. So let's just look at Igor's face really quickly. And oh wait, that was Victor. This is Victor, right? Look, this is the man who they got in jail right here, right? And then this is the suspect. I mean, looks like the same exact person to me.
I mean, yeah, come on.
I mean, dude, look,
Yeah,
it's
it's
exactly the same person.
same guy. Plus, I mean, the other thing is they were trying to say like, well, they they spend all this time and money and effort to frame up these dummies, and it's like, look, first of all, they didn't have that ability, especially in Ukraine. They didn't have that ability back then. Nowadays, I think like this, it's so interesting how like if this had happened someplace else, I think the whole faking the video thing would just be a big laugh, because everybody would say, especially back then, everybody would say, well, that's just ridiculous. I think there's a little bit of a smokescreen that the defense is taking advantage of, because this is during, you know, because it's like there's this period, and I guess still going, right, in the Ukraine, where the leadership and the government and all that goes back and forth, and there has been some funny business about elections and things like that, which isn't picking a side. It's just saying that that's true. There's been a lot of controversy. Um, yeah, it like injects unreasonable um, doubt, I guess, into this where it doesn't need to be. So now, like, yeah, you could kind of deep fake some of this stuff. You'd need a really good computer, you'd need a good software. Probably most people are going to be able to detect it anyway. But back when this happened, there was nothing at all. I mean, you would have to be a major movie studio in the United States to be able to pull off the kind of face swapping stuff that would even be close to it. And you know what? I bet you it still wouldn't even work to be able to do it on like kind of this older video format. You know what I mean? Like it would almost look too good.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. That those claims are completely ridiculous, in my opinion. You know what I mean? So, I guess now that we're done with like the general gist and the general story, I think just some thoughts and some questions that we still have. Now I want to start off with like, um, My like a few points. So essentially, let's remember that Alexander Hanza now is a the man in the middle in this particular picture is now a free man, and he served 9 years. He was the accomplice. Um, I don't know. Like, do you have any opinions on that? Like, he has a family, he has kids. You know?
I mean, it could be that, something changed after this. It could be he like, hit rock bottom in jail. I heard Eastern European jail is not a fun place to be. I heard it's much worse than prison here. So it could just be he got out of his system. But yeah, I'm kind of surprised. I mean, when I looked at the punishments that these guys got, which in some cases there are some stiff punishments, but I really like.
Yeah.
I'm kind of amazed. I mean, does the Ukraine? I probably should have researched this. Does the Ukraine not have the death penalty?
It doesn't. It doesn't. It was abolished after the
Okay.
fall of the Soviet Union, or maybe like in the early 2000s. It doesn't have anymore.
Okay, well that makes sense then. Yeah, because I mean, what they did. I mean, it's so hard to find something where it's more obvious that the person actually did the thing that they're accused of.
But
You know what I
don't you
mean?
think? But don't you think that Alexander Hanza may should have had like a harsher penalty because he pretty much
Yeah.
got 9 years. 9 years is like, 9 years is a big. Obviously, it's a big sentence, but 9 years is not necessarily a life-ending sentence, especially when you're like 18. You're getting out at like 27. You know what I mean? So you still have your whole life ahead of you, essentially. So do you think that Alexander Hanza, the accomplice who knew of what was happening and participated in many robberies, do you think he still deserved to get his life back?
No, I mean, gosh, it's so strange that I mean, Poland is just nearby, right? So in Poland, we saw people get much worse sentences on much less evidence, and not even a victim, right? We can't find the victim. This thing, we have victims all over the place. We have, um, like it's on video. You have, I can't even think of what more conclusive evidence you need, and yeah, it's strange. It does make you wonder if they were just worried about other consequences or whether they're kind of like reserving
Yeah.
reserving their right to bring this back later, right?
Exactly. Another interesting point that I think is worth mentioning and briefly talking about it is that these guys, these murderers, right, they went to the funerals, right? And this is the pictures that they took. They went to the funerals of their victims, and afterwards, when everyone scattered, they took these pictures, right? So this picture is really shocking because it's someone, and I'm not sure. It looks like to me from the gravestone that it's maybe a woman because there's like a little picture, but it's really blurry. From what we can see here, it seems that they came back, and essentially for everyone who's listening to this, they're holding their middle finger towards the gravestone of one of their murder victims. And it looks like it's a fresh gravestone, like it just happened. And a few more of these pictures I want to bring in. This picture right here is also with one of the suspects just doing a selfie as they're what seems to be burying the one of the victims, like the coffin, like they're putting now dirt on the coffin, they're burying the coffin, and this guy is just taking like a selfie like that. I mean, if I was at that particular funeral and if I saw this guy taking a selfie like that, I would be like, what's up with that guy? You know what I mean?
Isn't it interesting? They almost did like the stereotypical killer stuff. When they say like look at the funerals and the crime scene and see who comes back to check it out or try to insert themselves into it. I mean, you would think that they were smart enough, as stupid as they were, to try to be a little more discreet when they were taking these little selfies and things, and then flipping it off. Like maybe they waited till everybody had left the end of the funeral or something like that. But Yeah, I mean, but once again, this is like not helping their case of insanity, right? This all looks like very deliberate. We're egging each other on kind of behavior. I'll say that this is something that it reminds me a little bit of. Columbine is one of those examples where they, when they try to figure out why these guys do this horrible thing, um,
Yeah.
they said there's sometimes you end up with this, and I don't know that it's just boys or men. It could also be women in other contexts for kind of group behavior. But they think for those two guys, they were kind of egging each other on, like probably by themselves, neither of them would have gone through with it. But because there was the two of them, they kind of kept each other from chickening out on their plans or the bad thing that they did. And I wonder if this is also the case with these guys as well. It's that same kind of toxic friendship.
Yeah.
Though it's not just two of them, right? It's multiple of them. Yeah, they're egging each other on, making it worse and worse.
Exactly, exactly. And another image that I want to bring in, this is the last image that I found pretty interesting. This is Igor Sprunyuk's family picture, right? This is him. I don't know, seems like he's 14. I think at this point he's already like capturing dogs in the nearby forest. And we can see him with his family members. We can see his mother and his father. And the parents, it seemed like they. Like, what do you make of these parents? Like, these parents, like, do you think they did not know what their son was up to?
That's that. I mean, me and all these shows, right? I always want to go to like the child psychology stuff. I gotta wonder what's going on in these households. What's going on? What's making these guys go out and like start inflicting pain on the world around them? So are they getting abused or, either sexually or physically at home? Are they seeing stuff go on at home that's then setting the tone for how they, go out into the world? It's really weird. Like you can't. I mean, obviously, you look at a photo, you can't really tell. I mean, they look like kind of dour people. His dad doesn't look like a friendly guy, but they don't look happy. I would say no one's really like super smiling or anything. Maybe that's just the way it is for those portraits. Maybe you're not supposed to be like a grinning idiot, but they don't. I mean, nobody really looks like super loving, happy to be there in this photo.
Yeah, exactly, man. And yeah, with that, I think I pretty much went over everything I wanted to go over. Now, I wouldn't want to run over your stuff. So, if there's anything still that we haven't discussed yet, or anything that's on your mind regarding the Dnepropetrovsk Maniacs, then have at it, man.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've wove a lot of them in as we try to go on. I mean, that's if there was one theme. It's always about this there's this famous quote I come back to again and again from one of the former wardens of Alcatraz, where he basically said, um, everybody that was in that prison that he was warden of was basically a product of a bad childhood. And I don't think he was wrong. I mean, they show it again and again. And actually, interestingly, on our next week's topic, some variation of this is going to come up again, for some of the stories we're going to talk about. But you can't help but notice that there should have been an intervention. And actually, they weren't. It wasn't like they were not in legal trouble before. I think that they'd had some legal scrapes. They'd done things that you would think had been detected. I mean, why did no one notice that dogs were hanging all over the place, right? Um, I think the reason they were caught was they were so stupid about the casual level of violence that they had gotten used to. They couldn't even imagine that killing a bunch of people in a metropolitan area that isn't even that big would cause an extreme amount of attention and investigative efforts. So even though maybe they thought they were killing people who were nobodies or that nobody cared about, or I don't even know if they put that much thought into their victims, because they really seem to have lost their empathy pretty early on. I think I would argue that's the output, the product of them doing all that kind of stuff that made them jaded to
Yeah.
that kind of violence. Yeah, is what drove them to maybe be stupid about how other humans would think of what was going on, and really look how quickly they were stopped once it became obvious that like something was going on.
Exactly. No, that's a good point. It does seem that to me that they could have been stopped a lot quicker because it seems like they caused so much damage to the society before they were eventually apprehended, and it was because of them being stupid and selling one of the mobile phones to the pawn shops, right? And yeah, this was a great episode this week. Definitely an interesting case. A different format. But speaking about format, next week we have like at least we're definitely preparing a new format, for our audience members. And dude, excited about potentially what we're doing next week?
Yeah, I am. We've been doing this for, gosh, almost exactly 2 years. This will be what next the next episode I think is going to be 120 for us. And I know one of the because on one hand I'm really happy that we've gotten to cover so many topics in depth, especially ones that were on my list. You know what I mean? My like the list that I just always wanted to talk about and flesh out. And so we've got that done, and we will do more. Of course, we have much more. We always have people giving us good additions. But I think one frustration I've always had is that I'll see something really interesting during the week, and sometimes if we're lucky, we can get it on the list, and it's a big enough topic. There's enough to talk about, and things have happened where we can actually go and cover it on the show for like the full, 90-minute, 120-minute treatment that we give it. But for all those stories, there's all these other gems of either cases that like you're just starting to get your fingernails under, to find out about, or breaking news, like the Gabby Petito thing was a case where we could kind of have enough to go off of. But just stories that pop up during the week. Sometimes they're about things that happen now. Sometimes they're cold case stuff that suddenly got hot again. But we really wanted to try to figure out if there's a way to experiment with our format to get you some of this kind of information earlier, and to give more of an overview and maybe an ongoing coverage about things like this, if that makes sense.
Yes, exactly. And I'm actually really excited for the next week's show. I hope everyone will have a wonderful end of their week. I hope everyone had a nice Halloween celebration, you know what I mean? Because this episode will be coming out after Halloween. I'm really hoping that the next episode, the next format will be a great start to everyone's November, and really excited about that, seriously. And I can't wait to record. But for now, guys, please just stay safe, and we'll catch you on the next week's episode. Peace out.